it's Kira and welcome back to another video. I'd like you to please raise your hand if you are someone who has loads of big books on your shelf but you consistently put off reading them because you're scared of how big they are or you're scared of how long they're going to take you to read. Because I'm here, I'm calling myself out. I do this consistently time and time again. There are quite a few books that I really want to read, but I consistently talk myself out of reading for the reasons mentioned before. So I hope some of you are also out there at home with your hands up, admitting defeat to these large books. But I'm here to tell you that it is a new year, and together we can take on the challenge of reading big books and sort of like facing our fears, or at least that's what I'm going to be trying to do this year. Nervously drinks tea. Literally, I love big books. Some of my favourite books have been bigger books. Last year, one of my favourite books was A Little Life by Hana Yanagihara. That is obviously a really big book. I also really love Little Women. That was a larger book. And I do love books that allow you to really dive into a character's life and follow them throughout a large period of time and see their development and see how everything changes for them. I love that. That's something that I always really enjoy in books, and yet I also let myself be scared away from larger books, which makes no sense because generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, when a book is larger, it does mean that you are going to have the opportunity to get to know characters slightly better and to follow them for a longer period of time. So logic would suggest that if that's something that I love in books, I should be reading more big books, but like we've discussed, I let the fear get in the way. But this year, that is changing, and so I've selected 5 big books from my TBR. Now there are definitely more, but I am also human and I'm definitely not going to be reading a huge book every single month. I do still want to reach my Goodreads goal, which this year is 85 books. So I'm trying to be sensible and tick off a decent number of big books from my TBR whilst also not spending all year reading just 12 really big books. So without further ado, let's jump into my big books 2021 TBR. So the first book on this TBR is one that I'm actually very excited about. I was gifted this book for Christmas, and because this is an author that I already know I like, I'm fairly confident that despite the size of this book, I'm definitely going to enjoy it. And that book is The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which is 863 pages long. So definitely quite a chunky book, and like I said, I already know that I like this author's writing style because last year I was very happy to finally take The Secret History off my TBR. I loved The Secret History, it was so interesting, and obviously for any fans of dark academia, it is just like a holy grail book. I know that The Goldfinch is a book that people tend to not like as much as The Secret History, or just generally don't like very much, but I also know that The Secret History is a book that has some quite mixed opinions. People tend to either love it or hate it, and I know a lot of people don't make it through The Secret History because they don't get along with the writing style and they end up stopping partway through because it's just not for them. Whereas I'm definitely more confident going into this one knowing that I have read and loved The Secret History, because I feel like it's just a thing of preference with Donna Tartt's writing style that people either love or hate. I clearly love it. If you don't, that's obviously totally fine, but I'm pretty confident I'm going to like this one, and it sounds very interesting. Now, I haven't actually heard many people talk about this book in depth, so I don't know a huge amount about the plot, but the blurb of this book sounds super interesting, and it probably describes it in a much more eloquent way than I could. So I'm going to read the blurb of the book. It says, age 13, Theo Decker, son of a devoted mother and an absent father, miraculously survives a catastrophe that otherwise tears his life apart. Alone and rudderless in New York, he is taken in by the family of a wealthy friend. Theo is tormented by longing for his mother, and down the years he clings to the thing that reminds him most of her, a small captivating painting that ultimately draws him into the criminal underworld. Now, to me, that sounds super interesting because, first of all, it ticks the box of following a character over quite a long period of time, which I love. And second of all, a criminal underworld in New York with an orphaned child just sounds extremely interesting. And I know that Donna Tartt writes about crime from The Secret History in such an intriguing and dark way. And she gives you lots of little, hints and tips about things that are coming up, just gradually dripping information and hints in such an intriguing way that I personally absolutely love. So I'm very excited about this one, and I think of all of the books on this TBR, this is probably the one that I'm going to try and get to first. surprise, surprise, classics can tend to be on the larger side. Of course, not in every case, but I do feel like there are a larger proportion of classics that fall into the big book category than contemporaries. And so if you have watched my recent upload of my 2021 classics TBR, you might have already seen a couple of these books, but the reason I've decided to include them on this TBR as well is, of course, because of their size, but also specifically because the reason I haven't read them yet is because I've been put off by how large they are. So the first book in that category is Middlemarch by George Eliot, which is 785 pages long. Jay bought me this book for my birthday in 2019, I think, so it's been on my shelves for nearly 2 years, and I've just been predominantly daunted by the size and also by my lack of knowledge about what this book is really about, because I feel like this is a book which is predominantly a character study of a small community. And anyone I've ever heard talking about this book has just described it as an interesting character study, but I've never really heard much about the plot, and often that is what hooks you into wanting to read a book. And so despite the fact that I have read a George Eliot book before, The Mill on the Floss, which I really enjoyed, I just haven't been hooked into wanting to pick this one up because all I see when I look at this book is its size. I don't have anything to pull me in to want to read it because I don't know anything about the plot. However, along with my friend Mary from the channel Mary Among Stories, I have finally decided to take on the challenge of reading Middlemarch in the month of March, because why the hell not? Much like the Goldfinch, and knowing that I already like Donna Tartt's writing style, the fact that I have read The Mill on the Floss before does give me confidence that I will enjoy George Eliot's writing style, and although I know it might be a challenge because she does tend to write in quite a dense way, I'm also confident that I will be able to get through that and enjoy it, which I think will definitely be helped by the fact that I'm reading it alongside a friend. We're coming up with a chapter schedule so that we're not having to read it all in one go, and I'm hoping that having someone to discuss it with and enjoy the reading experience with will make this book just that little bit less daunting, and hopefully by the end of March I'll actually be able to give you guys some more of a plot summary than the fact that it's just a character study, and then maybe some of you will actually want to read it, because I do genuinely think that is the thing that I've struggled with most. It's just not really knowing much about what it's about, not being able to find much information on the book and that kind of really gives you much depth or plot summary, and therefore not having that hook to want to read it. But I'm pushing past that. Mary and I are going to read it together and we're going to have a good time. I'm manifesting it. So the next book on this TBR, and the only other book that is on both my classics TBR and this big books TBR, is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book is actually only 522 pages long, which I was very surprised about because it looks bloody massive, but it is quite a tall book, so I think that definitely has something to do with it. And if it was a standard book size, it would probably be more 800 pages, but either way, it's a pretty huge book. I'm sure we can all agree on that. I was kind of thinking about how long this book has been on my radar, and this one has been recommended to me several times by my boyfriend Jay because this is one of his favourite books. And then I remembered that very handily, Jay always writes when he starts and finishes books in the front cover so that he can keep track of his reading progress. Clearly he is not a fan of Goodreads, but that's how he keeps track of it. So I'm just going to check when did he actually read this book. Okay, Jay finished this book on the 6th of July, 2018. So we are now in 2021. This book has been on my radar for nearly 3 years, we'll say at least 2.5 years. And it's definitely the size that's put me off, because I think every time that Jay has recommended this book to me, I've always responded with oh, I'll just read it when I've got more time, or oh, I don't have time to read a big book right now, or I need to make sure that I read enough books this month. And I've been put off by all of those excuses. But this book actually sounds so interesting, and it sounds like the kind of book that I would really, really enjoy. From what I understand, in this book, we have a main character who commits a crime. And of course, this is a book called Crime and Punishment, so it's no surprise that the following events of the book are all about punishment, but I don't think this is about punishment in the traditional judicial sense of being punished for a crime. This is more the mental torment and self-punishment that this main character puts himself through following this crime. He's both tormented by the prospect of being found out and traditionally punished for this crime, and then he is also tormented by guilt for what he's done, and therefore we see his gradual mental decline as he is sort of plagued by this guilt and fear and self-punishment as the book goes on. Sounds really, really interesting. Jay has, I think, read it 2 times now, and he's recommended it to me, like I said, so many times, so I'm very confident that I'm going to really enjoy this one. Well, technically, the next book on my TBR is A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin, which has 852 pages. Now, the reason I say technically is because this is the 4th book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, and I have previously read the first 3 books. Logically, the next progression in a book series after book number 3 is book number 4. That makes total sense. However, it's been a long time since I picked up any of the books in this series. I was reading them in 2019 and I was really enjoying them, but for some reason I just stopped after book number 3. I didn't read any of the books in this series at all in 2020, and so it's been well over a year now since I actually picked any of them up at all. And so I'm currently in a bit of a debate with myself about whether or not I should be continuing on and starting book number 4, or whether I should go back and refresh my memory and start again from book number 1. So I think what I'm going to do is pick up A Feast for Crows, read a couple of chapters and see whether it makes sense in my mind, whether things click into place, or whether I'm completely lost and confused and have no idea what's happening, and then that will dictate whether or not I continue reading this one or whether I go back and start again with book number 1, which is A Game of Thrones. But either way, I'm sure we can all agree that whether I'm reading this book or whether I'm reading the first book in the series, all of George R.R. Martin's books are absolutely massive, so I think I can definitely class whichever one of the books in this series I read, or whichever ones, because hopefully I read even more than just one. They're all bloody big, so they definitely class as big books that I'll be ticking off of my TBR. The final book on this TBR is one that I am very excited about, but also kind of terrified of. First of all, because it's a horror, and it's meant to be scary, and second of all, it's the biggest book on this TBR, and that is It by Stephen King. This book has 1,067 pages, and those pages are Bible thin, which always makes me nervous because it just means a book is absolutely huge. But I am very excited to read this one because I really love Stephen King's writing. I have enjoyed almost every single one of his books that I've read, and I've been gradually reading more and more of his books every year, but this one has been staring at me for quite some time now, and let's be honest, the stare of Pennywise is not something that anyone wants to ignore. So I think it's finally time to tick this one off my TBR. I feel a particular affinity with this one just because it was the first encounter I ever had with anything to do with Stephen King. I obviously haven't read it, but I think when I was about 12, me and my friends at school at the time watched the 80s adaptation of It, and it terrified me, like haunted my dreams for years to come. And so it was my first ever Stephen King encounter. I've obviously since gone on to read some of his works, and like I said, I really enjoyed most of them, and so I'm very excited to finally tick this one off my TBR. And I'm even more excited about this one because just like with Middlemarch, I'm going to be buddy reading this one with Mary from Mary Among Stories. She also wants to tick this one off her TBR, so it seemed like the perfect excuse for another big buddy read. But because this is a Stephen King and a horror, I think we're going to be waiting until closer to Halloween to pick up this one, because it just seems like the perfect time to start this book. So I'm very excited to get to this one later on this year. So there we have it. Those are some of the big scary books that have been staring at me from my bookshelves and that I'm finally hoping to read this year. I'd love to know whether you're setting yourself any big reading challenges this year, if there are any books that you've been putting off that you're finally going to be getting started with this year, or if you have any big book recommendations. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.